tell me via the chat whether you can hear me, please, and see me? Or rather, hearing is the more important thing. Just a quick message via the chat. Can you hear me? You're here, but you have problems with your speaker. Okay. But does that mean you cannot hear me? Shall I use any phones instead? Microphones? Let me check. Can the other participant please just write something whether that works? Is this better for you, or does it depend? Okay, then we rather do it without the speaker. There's someone else, I think, joining. Can you just quickly whether you can hear us? The anonymous participant, you were being asked. I hear very well. Very nice. Okay, thank you. That makes it easier. So we're a very intimate group today, but nevertheless, maybe a couple of people more joining, and I will just start with the introduction. Can you tell me, anonymous participant, whether you have also visited the first webinar? Because that makes it easier for me to understand how much of the introduction I have to I'll telling you or skip. First webinar. Okay, great. And very welcome. I'm doing today the webinar on the of the series from the idea to the investor. So what we do is basically follow this whole line of starting with your first idea and to progressing investors. And the session today is on the question of testing your idea and the proof of concept. So what we have asking the questions behind is why a good preparation is necessary, and also what you need for a good proof of concept. I will just quickly start with the organizational part. It will be around 30 minutes of, or 35, 40 minutes of the session of introduction into the topic, and then some more details and some practical advice, and also an example of how you can proceed that actually to the real life. And then we will have time for questions at the end. Since we're a small group today, you can also post your questions meanwhile, so maybe we can also answer some of them on the run. As I said, this is part of the webinar series, and you can see part. What's happening now? Sorry. Siemens Stiftung. Okay, here we go. Sorry, some technical difficulty. So that's the second webinar today, and we will also dive more into detail on the business plan and business planning needs, and also the actual approach of investors, which will be covered in the third and fourth seminar. Now, to just understand why we do this and where we're coming from, let me introduce to you the Empowering People Network, which you might know very well, because that's the organization that actually brings you here. The Empowering People Network is the reason why we can do all this, because they are they started with the idea that people like you who have great ideas and who want to grow their idea and get more professional need some networks, some expertise, some knowledge in order to do all this. So there are actually 5 elements in the idea and the program of the Empowering People Network, and they comprise basically everything from solution databases to expertise and coaching, connecting all of you through various events and programs, and the 5th part, also qualifications. So really actually skills training and knowledge build up in order that you can make whatever you do even better and even more professional. So this is the reason why all of this is actually possible, and the Empowering People Network, or Siemens Stiftung, partnered with the organization that I'm working for, and this is called FASE. FASE stands for Financing Agency of Social Entrepreneurship. So we are a daughter company of Ashoka, which is the biggest network of social entrepreneurs worldwide, and basically work similar to the Siemens Stiftung or the Empowering People Network, with the idea that bringing people, like-minded people together and supporting them with resources will actually give them much more abilities to grow their ideas and to broaden the topic of social entrepreneurship. What this is all about is actually looking for the one who's changing the system. So it's basically about ideas that are exceptional, about people that have an entrepreneurial spirit that bring things and the topics they're working on much farther than actually anyone else has done in the past. So these change makers are the ones that are in the focus of Ashoka. And we, as a daughter company of Ashoka, work with the social entrepreneurs in order to bring their companies and their organizations into the professional context of investors. So we basically merge the center of business and social. We make these two ends meet and make the investors give their money in order to grow the companies that the social entrepreneurs have founded. We're doing this with a focus on Germany, a little bit Europe, but since most of our investors are so far only sitting here, we have a little limited region, although we did have projects in the past where at least the headquarters was somewhere here, but the operations as such were also in some other countries. Yes, this is for the introduction of who we are. And about the topic of today, let's have a look at the context. I just put here a short definition of the idea that the proof of concept brings, to make sure that we're basically starting on the same page. So when I talk about the proof of concept, I really mean a certain stage and action item. And as you can see here in the development process, it is somewhere between the first idea and the bring to market. So we're now, with the session today, covering the page where you have started your organization, but aren't really at the end yet and are somewhere in between, where proof of concept is mostly that point of time where you will be needing it. You can read below's definition. The one is a little more complex. The other is pretty shortened up to the most important part. The buzzwords that I feel are the most relevant here is, on the one hand, the prototype, and on the one hand, evidence. So these are really the things that basically everything comes down to, and the main focus of today. As you might know or might have thought, the idea is not that you have a perfect product at the end of a proof of concept. So it will not be about having everything perfect at the end. Instead, it's more to have really reasonable evidence that gives you believe that your idea is working. And as you might understand, the definition of reasonable evidence and a proof is something that's not as strict in reality as you probably wish for, but we will come to that at a later stage, just to have this short definition summed up here. Now, let's dive into the whole topic. As some of you might remember from last time, I started with the scenario, and maybe it's It actually is similar to where you stand, or maybe you have been at that point, where you have some kind of working product or an idea of a working product. You have a right ambition, you have an organizational structure that's somehow working, and you're asking yourself, what's the next step and how can I actually attract investors? So the whole attracting investors is at the end the point where basically everything comes up, because that's where you need the money from to actually continue and grow your work. The term scalability was used also in the last webinar quite a lot, because that's growing your idea bigger is what this is about. So what you then actually want, or what you're looking for, is that you want to test your product in the real world. You want to see that it's working, and you kind of also want some next steps that are more concrete than maybe the steps that you have done in the past. So in sum, I call it here proof of concept, and that actually contains several things. Now, as I understand, most of you are in the middle of this whole building a company position, and that's actually a good reason to have many things you can do, and maybe a lack of time where you say, well, why would I actually need to plan now a good proof of concept? Because it's just too much to do. I don't know where to get the time from, and just let me do this on the road, and just, by the way, doing it like casual style, I would say. Well, I summed up some reasons here why I believe it is worthwhile spending the time focused and also well planned to set up a proof of concept. Now, the first part, again, is the investor. And this is the potential investor here, because often you're not at that stage yet where investors are really in the concrete contact with you. So for your investor, the perspective is basically that he will only give you money, or she, when they are confident enough that your business and your idea will work. Now, what is important for them? It's important that they see that your product is kind of, or has been sold, has been produced, has been receiving feedback. So all of these things that actually happen when you do this. So they want to have some traction, what it's called. They want to have some proof, and they basically want to reduce their fear, or their fear for failure, and increase their certainty by reducing the risk. And the risk is basically that your idea fails. So that's the perspective from the investor. From your company perspective, you are basically probably in between your whole processes, but you haven't really had the chance to give to the customer side a clear evidence and a clear structure that you're working with. And you might have tested something with yourself, but you haven't been reliable to anyone. And actually, in a proof of concept phase, that's the important part, is that you are actually have reliable, because you have to do things and you have to commit to things, and you will be asked by your customers to act in a much more professional and a much more organized way than maybe you have done in the pre-phase or in the whole setup phase. So that's the second part, where you can actually use this time to test your organization. Am I ready? Are my processes right? Are my people right? And is everything set up in my setup in such a condition that I can go out on the market? And the third part, last but not least, is yourself. Because what you might not, or what some people tend to forget on the way that they're going, is that you commit for your idea and for your company for probably a really long time. So it would be nothing more than foolish if you just ran out there and just waited for some good feedback to come, instead of planning it accurately, and also maybe avoiding mistakes that you can avoid if you plan ahead. So you want to have proof for yourself that it's working. You also want to have reliable data when you go out and present your idea and discuss it. It's much better if you go out and say, we can reach 220 people, than if you go out and say, we can reach a couple of people, because it makes you more confident in what you do, and it will help you convince other people of your idea. And you also probably want to have a clear plan of what's coming up ahead, because that's what guides you, and that's what probably is also a factor of your motivation. So for many companies, as I said, a proof of concept is just happening, and while they're not even thinking about it, it's just a normal thing to do. And while that's perfectly fine, and while that's a thing that many just do, I think it really gets you much more out of it if you plan it and if you are aware of the different factors that entails. So let's look at the different the broad spectrum of gaining your proof of concept, and of the different, first of all, the different spans that you can take, and then the content that's actually should be part of a proof of concept. So the full risk proof on the left side is basically that just throw it all in version. You start just right away in the market. You just hope to generate enough cash to cover all this, and you don't really have this reluctancy to go out because you just believe that it's happening. That is some kind of a proof, yes, but it's also the full risk proof. So the positive side on it is that if you have success, you will not be stoppable, because that will be exactly the thing that people are asking for. You will have shown that it works, and everything will probably go on the the smooth and the pretty quick way. Unfortunately, there are also some downsides, and the reason why not too many companies are really going that full risk proof way, because it's a question of two things. The first thing, and you will probably have noticed that in the past, is that you need money to finance all that. So actually being able to just go out there with a full potential is often not the case, because you need to generate something to do all this. So money is the first factor, and the second factor is that you only have one chance. If you miss that chance, and if anything small doesn't work out, it's most often much more difficult to rewind and to redefine your product or your processes, and your name and your brand and your company will have been out there already, but you can't take it back. So that's the problem, that even small mistakes are bad mistakes. For what companies would that actually work? I would say two cases again. The first of all is high time pressure. So whenever you have probably a window of opportunity, or just such time pressure that you can't do anything else than just go out, then it might be a way for you. The second one would be low cost intensive projects. So if you really don't need a lot of money and you have maybe 10 ideas and just want to try which one you're focusing on, then going out, starting with that might work if you have a low cost intensive project. The second, let's switch to the right side, is the low-key proof, and something that you might have come across. It is basically the minimal version of the proof of concept, and that's why it has such a limited version also of benefit for you, I would say. It's basically just a very theoretical approach, and it encompasses mostly market research topics and mostly investigations that are limited in scope, and as I said, very theoretical in their meaning, which says that you don't really go out with a product, but you present an idea to, for example, to a customer. Let's say, if I had this product looking like this and that, would you buy it? Then the customer gives an answer, and you can work with that answer, but it's a different scenario than if you can give him something to hold in his hands or her hands and ask, would you buy this product for a price of €5? So that's the limited part. The benefit is, of course, that it's very inexpensive. You can do it fairly easily. You don't need a lot of resources. And it can be a very good ground to start, because at one point we all are in this situation where you just need something to work with, and that limited field test is probably a good first step. The problem is that it is often just not enough to deliver sufficient proof, because, as I said, it's different if you have something to hold on to or a service that you can actually test in real life than if you just have the idea of something. So the practical results that are missing are often also from investor side a good reason to say, well, you know, great idea, but you need to go a little bit further before I trust you. What are scenarios in that the low-key proof could actually work? I would say it works for very complex ideas to start with something. So if it's just the product is so complex that it's just too expensive to do a prototype, for example, for technical products, then it's probably must be the first step to start with a low-key proof and just, you know, put the better proof of concept at a later stage just to have something to hold on to. And the second idea that I thought about was copied concepts. So when you see a product or a service, most often that is being used somewhere else and has been successful there, sometimes people are happy enough if they say or if they see, okay, this has been working in this setup, and you've proven that it worked on one way or the other, and that's enough for me. So these are two scenarios, but as you can see, I'm not super excited for both of these options on the left and on the right, because it's just maybe not the best way in all opportunities. So what we're looking at today is the medium risk proof in the middle, and it basically focuses on the point that you get yourself a scope, a testing scene, a test balloon that you can work with, and it gives you the opportunity to make mistakes, that you go out and that you can rework on your product, that you can convince investors with these experiences and these results that you get from the test, and that you can actually minimize your risk of well, going into the wrong direction. As I said, it's not as easy because it takes time, and it's also sometimes very difficult to determine the scope. So actually seeing what is the right test example, what is enough and what is not enough. So these are definitely difficulties that you face in either way. Sorry, I couldn't make it earlier. So yeah, you will get the presentation afterwards. It's recorded and you also get the presentation, Daria, so no problem. Thanks for joining. Now, the important question: what is actually necessary to have a good proof of concept? What does it contain? Let me start. So I put it up in 5 factors. You will find a lot of things if you look for proof of concept. So it's very difficult to trim it down to the most important parts, but I try to do this in this on this paper. So I hope it works for you as a framework. Now, you always start with a high-level analysis of what you're going through and what you want to achieve. So in the very, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the very part is how the product will support the business goals. So this is supposed to be very high level. What do you want to achieve? For example, how does my product help my target group? How will my service be able to approach a topic that hasn't been approached so far? So this is the very general questions that you've probably been asking yourself already, just to put them down to make sure, okay, this is the direction we're heading. The second part on the right, the clearly defined criteria for success, is basically the more detailed version of it. So this is where you actually go into the nitty-gritty stuff and start becoming more specific. This is important because you will see that when I said in the beginning, you will be held reliable or accountable. This is actually something that you can use to your benefit when you're precise in your goals. So the next slide also will go into more detail on the topic of milestones. But what I mean here is that you really want to be very clear in what you want to reach as an aim, and what your proxies are to measure that. So It's not about how is my target group being reached, but it's about how many people do I want to reach, how many cities do I want to be available at, in what time frame. So all of these very concrete topics that that you use for your planning. And you also need this for your other plans, financial plans, for example. So this is something that really helps you to pin down. In the next step, you will, of the certain criteria and milestones that you've defined, you will pick out the ones that are that you can use for your testing and for your proof of concept, because not all of them will probably be available to you or will be ready to get in just the proof of concept phase. So some of them will be too far ahead to really test them, but you will pick out these ones that are actually manageable for you and that you find the most important and the most relevant to your stakeholder group. In the third step, it's important to have the documentation in the planning phase and also for the evaluation phase planned out. So what you basically, what it contains is that you have to ask yourself, how will you actually do this? How will you conduct the whole process, and how would it work for you? That is on the one hand the question of the scope. So what I said before, what are the questions that I'm looking at? What are the aims I want to achieve? What are my test sizes and the batches that I'm looking at? So really have this very clearly documented for you to know, okay, I have these and these aims in the couple next months to follow, and it's easier for me to track them when I've them written down and when I'm clear of what I'm doing here. It's also a question of who will be involved. So who of your team members will be doing what. Be very clear and in providing the data to the people and having them put to certain tasks. So usually it's very difficult if you say, okay, team XYZ will do that bunch of work and the other people will do the rest. Try to be very pinned down to one person per item, because that will make it much easier for you to follow up. And also the question again, how much money do you plan to spend on this way of the testing phase, and are you sure you have this money available, or are you applying for grants or different options or opportunities in order to have money available? The fourth part is the question of the evaluation, and that is pretty much self-evident, because whatever you do in your proof of concept phase, the most important part is that at the end you have good arguments that you can offer your interested investors or parties that you want to work with. So whatever you do in this whole phase, even if you're doing it not very well planned in the beginning, make sure you have very good documentation at the end, because that's the whole thing you get out of it. Evaluating the results can be anything from the collected data, so how many customers were approached, how many of them reacted, how many declined, and with what reason. There could be like one analysis part, and another analysis part could be the question, any feedback on the products, on the processes, how do they perceive your offer, what are their expectations, how would they pay that for the price, so any kind of feedback you got along the way that you can actually use for your further development of the product, is like all these things are the ones that you want to have put into your evaluation component. And last but not least, it is good for you if you have a plan how to move on, because at one point or another you will need to determine that this proof of concept phase is over and that you have gathered all the results that you wanted to have, and you want to have a realistic time or realistic setup of your next steps when you have achieved these things, how you continue. Also to communicate this, for example, to your stakeholders by saying, we're doing this product testing phase right now, and if we're successful, you can expect some kind of product with us in, for example, 8 months time or a year. So something that keeps your customers on the run and that gives them some feedback on what you plan and when they can actually look out for your product. Just a short notice on this side, it's always helpful in whatever you do to be sure that you always probably need more time than you expected. So don't be too nitty-gritty on I can do this and we can be a little bit quicker. Everyone always says that they're being very very reluctant with their figures and very that they are very shy in giving something out, but yeah, it's always more time that you need, always probably more money that you need. So don't fool yourself by being too bullish on that end. Now, as I promised, as part of the milestones setup, I just wanted to give you another brief overview of what I mean with milestones and also how you can work with them. I don't know, probably the concept as such is clear to most of you, so I'm just making it brief here, how what milestones actually mean and how you can use them. So it means basically just the fact that you identify and schedule any goals and that you're later on able to track them in your progress. So it starts again with a rather big picture of where do I want to go, what do I want to reach, and then you try to pin it down to very exact and small and understandable items, because that is the one thing that you can actually work with in your daily life. You won't work with the big goals what you want to reach in 5 years' time, but you are much easier in working with goals of next week, next month, 4 months' time, and so on. So you can use it actually in the very early phase because it gives you some more structure and some more clarity in planning your next weeks and months. But you can also use it along the way, and most of the companies I know have at some point their milestone set up that they're working with. Yeah, as I said, provides guidance and structure, and also again being reliable against yourself and others. Because if you go out with a plan and you yourself work for the plan and someone else asks you where you stand, then it's actually something that you can't deny, and it's something that probably gives you a good motivation push, because you know, okay, I wanted to have reached that by now. Why did it not happen? What can I do against it? And how can I get back on track? I just put a couple of examples of milestones up here. So for example, a first sample product, starting the customer contact, which of course needs a lot of stuff in order to do that. And you can decide by yourself how detailed you want to be here. But ideally, the milestones is not like sending out a letter to ABC, but instead like more a little more general points that help you actually achieve them in a good time frame. So into that, now I brought an example of a company that we've been working with because I thought it's all of this theoretical stuff is probably very different to the scenarios you're working with. And the reason I chose this as an example is that it's actually interesting to see that it brings 3 key messages. The first message is that this whole topic of a proof of concept doesn't follow a fixed timeline. So it's very individual, very much depending on your business, and it's like most of the things in the business world, it can't be, you know, put on this timeline and starting now and ending then, but instead can change from time to time. So as you can see here in the timeline that I provided of RSO shift, yeah, maybe that I'll just give you a brief intro of what they actually do and make it more understandable. So the company as such works, you can see the picture here. They build up a solar-powered purification device, which means that the sun is heating up this whole device, And in the small drawers that you can see, there's actually for doctors operating instruments, so scissors and all that what you need for operations. And there, through the sun and the lightning effect or the heating effect, they're getting sterile, so they can actually work in developing countries with sterile instruments that are, of course, a great value add than if you have to work with non-sterile instruments. And they're building that. I think they're located in Germany, but they're selling it throughout the world, and that's their product. So fairly complex, very easy to understand, I think, the benefit, but in its production, in its selling, all of that not so easy. And now back again to the timeline. What I was saying is that there's not just one fixed timeline of when you do your proof of concept. As you can see for them, they had, for example, one, can you actually see my mouse? Not sure. They had one planning, development, and testing phase in spring 2013. They had followed by one successful crowdfunding campaign a year later, so fairly close to each other. They had another presentation of prototypes and small batch testing in March, followed again by then a bigger financing round with investors in the same year, a couple of months later. So it's not, one proof of concept and then you get the money and it's done, but instead it's really a process that keeps on going, and every now and then you might have again the necessity or feel the necessity or have the urge to test your product and conduct a proof of concept phase. Probably I would say the more complex your products are, the more loops you will have or you will do in providing proof of concept phases, because as you see, for example, with technical instruments, they just keep on developing and they just have new generations of better instruments. And so a new testing phase will sooner or later be important to see where it brought them, and also to give evidence that this is actually better working and a better product. And the third point I want to make is that, as I said, the whole testing phase and investor search is closely linked to each other. So it's nothing that you do, just for fun or just for your product, but again, there's a close link between, and the better you are in doing your product testing and proof of concept testing, the more likely you are to actually convince investors. Now I need to hurry up a little bit, but it's only 3 more slides, and then you can ask some questions. And now, considering for the practical implementation, I focused here on 4 aspects. Some of them we have been going through already, so I can make it short. The timing is probably the most important part, because it gives you, or it is relevant in a couple of aspects. It has, it's about the length and the timing. So how long do you plan to do all this, related to how much money you have to do all this, and also when is a good start. Is my product good enough to go out? Is it something that when I receive my feedback and my results will be so far that I can actually start selling it afterwards? And it has also this phase of different testing plans or different testing timelines. So as I said, it's not just, I do it once and then I'm done with that tick, but instead what are good timings related to my investor search, related to my R&D processes to do my proof of concept. So again, plan realistically, try to get a holistic idea of what you want to prove, whether you have the resources, whether you have the time also from your organizational stuff right now to do all this. And it can be anything from 2 months to a year that you use for your proof of concept phase. And it's nothing that you just do as a single instrument, but instead it can also, of course, join in with your other activities that you're doing. It's nothing that it's just, out of border of any of your other business operations. Regarding the scope, I said a couple of words earlier. So what you should really think about is both the big picture of where you're heading and what your strategy is, and also the milestones regarding the testing area, the sample size, all of the smaller details that you want to focus on in this whole scope of the testing. It's actually worthwhile also for this point talking to other people, getting some feedback from friends, from family, from the market, and tell them what your plans are, what you are wanting to go out with, what you want to, what kind of product you want to test, and also receiving their feedback to hear, well, maybe that's just not enough, or maybe you could do this and that additionally, or maybe it's better if you are more concrete in how this actually works. So just, talking beforehand and actually be able to integrating this feedback before you actually start with the proof of concept in the market might actually be worthwhile. The resources, again, covered here, will probably be your major limitation, because that's mostly the case that you're still in your early months or years. You still don't have a clear revenue stream or investor money in the background, and you need to keep eye on your resources. But at the end, it's something that I would say it's very much worth spending money and time on. Probably more time than money, because money should be very limited to the production of a prototype, for example, or salaries that you have to pay, but it shouldn't be too big of marketing efforts or anything like that. So it's really something that should the money resources should be limited for the product that you produce in the proof of concept phase. In the very first steps also, because that question usually comes up, how can you finance if you don't have investors and you need money to do all this? Well, the first step usually is any kind of donations that you can take, and the proof of concept phase, and even beforehand, a good idea is often financed by a lot of people who just believe in the idea and want to support you getting further. They don't need any proof because they're doing it as a good, and that's just fine for them. The more proof you have, the more you can reach other people, starting with organizations, starting with prize money, like the Empowering People Network Award. That's all these things that expect some kind of proof, that want to see that you have been out selling your product or giving your product and have been testing, and then come back with some results. And the more proof you have, the more you reach the phase where you can actually talk to investors. And as a last point, again, the documentation, starting with a good preparation, ending with a good final result documentation. Now, the critical question that's of course always in the room is the question, when is your concept actually proven? And the term proof of concept, I think, implies that there is actually an end to the story. So, I mean, it's called proof of concept, so there must be a proof, and the proof is always pretty black and white. Well, in fact, this general understanding, or understanding that, of course, or at least I was confronted with, is unfortunately very different in reality. That means that the assessment of whether a proof of concept is given is pretty much highly subjective and very dependent on the assessor or the investor, which can be the same person, of course. That makes it more difficult for you, because, of course, you have your understanding of whenever I reach the point that a proof or the concept is proven, and you go out there and you approach investors, and then you receive the feedback, well, that's not enough of a proof of concept. And you stand there asking yourself, well, I thought it was. And that's nothing I can really take away from you, because that was something I experience on a very regular basis, working with both social entrepreneurs and investors. So I rather want to make you aware of the situation, make you aware of the fact that it's nothing that you can do anything against it, and that you will probably at some point face this situation that someone will tell you that's not enough of a proof, but also give you the motivation that you will probably come across that or come over it, and will eventually have the point where you won't be asked anymore whether this is enough of a proof, because you make your revenues, because you sold your number of products, because you have your number of customers, and that's something that's a progress. So probably in the beginning there will be more questions. Don't be don't be too critical and too harsh on it, because it's just a subjective perspective that you can't do anything about it. And generally, the more revenue and also the closer you are to any break even is, of course, for most people still a good proof that your concept is actually working. Now, a little bit good news to that story is now that we're talking not in the very, very harsh venture capital world, but we are social entrepreneurs and also have a little bit of a social entrepreneur world around us. There's another side to keep in mind, and also something that gives you a little bit more freedom from this whole proof of concept. What I'm talking about here is the fact that most of the impact investors that we come across with, and most of the people that are actually in this operating in this whole scene, aren't really about just the financials, but they are about both the financials and the impact. And that is good news for you, because you are, from your nature, people who want to bring their idea and their business forward, but you also do this because you have some personal motivation, drive of a social or environmental topic that you want to address. And that means that you probably always look for, of course, the number of products, customers, etc. But you always have in mind some kind of social metrics in terms of how much lives can be saved, how much people can actually benefit from my offer. So all these things that are much more closer to the social aspects is something that usually investors wouldn't care about too much, but in the impact investment world that you will then operate in, these things actually matter. So what you can do and what you can use as your benefit is that you are equally looking for the social aspects that you're solving in terms of making them concrete, setting milestones, having a clear idea of what your social aims are. Also testing them, like in the proof of concept phase, understanding how many people benefit from the product, etc. And then making this transparent to the investor. Because then the scenario changes a little bit, and that you are being pulled out of this whole financial proof of concept part into something bigger, which gives you opportunity to also talk about the social aspects that you're solving. The only mistake that many people in the social setup make is that they underestimate the strength of the social aspects and the social impact that they have. So they only have that as a byproduct. They don't talk about it professionally. That's like the motivational spirit, but it's not integrated into the business. So what I urge you to do is really be very professional on the impact measuring that you do, and also on the metrics of all that, because that's something that you can actually use as an ability for convincing others and approaching investors. You can use the next slide, maybe if you go up in detail on here. It's just one example of how we can actually use that and plan these different steps, either in a staircase or in a flowchart. It's fairly complex to explain it in detail, but you can see here, this is taken from the website from Fineo. That's a very, in Germany, very well-known organization working with the whole impact assessment and social impact. So you can read something more here about how you can measure your impact goals and social impact goals in a professional manner, and how that can actually help you improve your business. Now, since I want to have time for your questions, let's just quickly look into the key learnings and what actually a proof of concept means. Well, we understood 4 things. We understood that you will test your product in a small scale to define what it means to you in the real world, with real people, real products, real examples. That the scope should be small, inexpensive, adequate. So whatever that means to your business, try to limit yourself to what is needed to be in a good position to argue that results are reliable, but don't spend too much time and money and efforts in producing that proof of concept. Look out for the feedback and the results and document them properly, because that's the benefit you can get out of it, and that's what you have later on to go approach others. And also be aware that the proof may for some people never be sufficient, and that you for yourself should define in the level and the degree that you at a certain stage find enough as a proof, and probably will go on in this iteration of other proof of concept steps when you have a more complex product. And now just a short checklist. I won't go through this. You can maybe look at it afterwards. Just a summary: if you want to plan a proof of concept, if you want to start with this, what questions you can ask yourself and how you can proceed. Now, that was it. And we have some 10-15 more minutes for questions that you can just type into the chat, and I will try to answer as many as possible. Any questions? Should I go into any more detail on any of the aspects? Then maybe I can go a little bit deeper. Please feel free to write any questions, but here's one question. What could I hear during the last half hour was very interesting. Oh, that's good. It's always helpful if people understand what I mean. So please feel free to post questions. I just want to maybe use the time to quickly say a couple more words on the page 16, because I was very fast on this. So the main idea that you can take out of this when you want to go into detail in your social impact analysis is that there is a differentiation in four parts. The first part, I hope you can read it, but the slides will be available afterwards in case it's too small. So the first part is a little bit more neglectable. It's a question of inputs. And inputs really means all the resources that you put into your work. And some of them are fairly general, like personal, like we see here, money, like all very natural things. But for you, maybe it's also some very distinctive elements that you have to put in for your job and for your business idea. The next step, and that's now the output phase here in blue, is all the activities that are being conducted by you, still in a fairly concrete way. So it's basically the service that you provide, the product that you give. So very much pinned down to the actual service of a product. And then it kind of grows in a little bit more societal and less concrete direction. In the second part, the lighter green here is the outcome. So it's how actually the society is being changed or environment is being changed by your offering. And that is here, for example, that's the same if you have this light green outcome here, or in the result staircase, it's a different kind of visualization, but the same idea behind. And you can differentiate between the target groups, for example, changing their behavior, the living conditions, any kind of development that takes place in person groups or in groups of persons through you selling your product. That's basically the third step. And the fourth step is then the impact on society. So if you have a product that you sell to or a product or service that you sell to a group of students, the students will be able to work better and have better school education and finish their school in a with a better grade and are then able to find better jobs. Then societal change would, for example, be the fact that a whole generation of better educated young people will improve the living conditions and will lead to the fact that their generational life will be alterated after all by your product. So that's really the way of thinking your maybe very small idea into a very broad context by being strict in the beginning to say, okay, this is my product, this is who will be reached, and then getting more general in terms of what will at the end be done by my product. Okay, there's a question from Daria. I feel like this is a good thing to do when there is a clear product. How does it differ from evaluations in general? I think it actually doesn't differ too much from evaluations. I think the important point is that very often it's not done for in the societal way for social entrepreneurial products. So what people often do is to say, okay, I'm having my product being sold and I'm reaching this much of people, but they're not thinking about the actually, clear and also pinned down to figures social impact that they're having. So what also Fineo expects from you and what I'm suggesting is that you try to be as precise in your societal and your impact study and assessment as you are with your other business operations. So really, it shouldn't be too different from what you do in general, but often it's just being neglected by many people. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Are there any more questions? Kind of. Maybe what do you mean with evaluations in general? For a business context or for? It is an evaluation of a pilot project, and it can also be. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be an pilot project. It can also be, or it is also done like on the run of your company, like your company proceedings. So it's not just limited to a first time. It's something that actually some organizations or especially professional investors ask of you as a social entrepreneur to come up with, because they expect you to measure yourself against what you promised and what you said you could reach. And so it's something it's something that's getting more and more important, and just a way to break it down for you in realizable steps. I think this staircase or the flow chart is a good way to approach this topic if you haven't been into it so far. The social sector, I think every evaluation should be about impact. Yeah, I agree that it should be about impact, but I would say in reality, in the best case, it's well, 50, not maybe 50-50, but around equal with the financial associations and expectations and the impact expectations. Because if you consider where we're coming from in the impact investing sector, it's still something where people need time to understand that it's okay if you don't separate this whole idea of just giving money as a donation or investing for a financial purpose, but combining it. People haven't done that too much in the past, and they're now, getting up to combining these things. And so I think it's in that sense understandable that maybe the next step will be that impact investing will only be about social impact. But for now, we're still quite happy that people are actually starting to consider this impact as some kind of return and reduce their expectations on the financial return in favor of the impact return. But I think that's a progress that will take some more years in order to bring more people in this whole understanding of why this actually makes so much more sense than just donating money or just investing, but instead of combining it. And I think you're in a good position in the sense that this whole topic will improve in the next years, and it will probably be more well known, the concept as such. So there aren't any more questions. I think the first people are also dropping out. Also the EPN network is thanking you. I'm thanking you as well for your participation, and I hope it was interesting for you. You maybe took something out that you didn't know before, and we're happy to have you also visit our third seminar. Just being posted March 29th with a new topic on the business planning, what you need, what maybe some tricks are that you haven't known, and so on. So I hope you had a good time. It was nice introducing this topic to you, and have a good day. Bye.